and create greater equity. There are ways to do it. We've seen it in action. We just have to fight those who don't want us to do it, right? So about 15 years ago, approximately, in Tucson, Arizona, educators there, many of them at the University of Arizona, came up with a program for the high schools, right? It was Mexican American Studies program, La Raza Studies, and it was an incredible program. It was across all disciplines in the high school. It was voluntary. You didn't have to sign up for it. You didn't have to be Chicanx to take the classes. Most of the kids were Chicanx, but you didn't have to be. There were black kids that took it, there were white kids that took it, there were other Latinx folks who did, who were not Chicanx. And so it was a voluntary program. Maybe 1,500 young people went through the program. And what they did is they taught all the subject matter through this Mexican-American lens. Not just literature, not just history, not just government class, right? But science and math and all the stuff they did, they talked about through a Chicanx lens. And as a result of this, you had students who were very much like the other students in the school, right? The district is overwhelmingly brown, disproportionately Chicanx, and you had a lot of kids from those same neighborhoods, same communities, same family backgrounds who didn't go through the program. So you actually now had an ability to compare, right, the outcomes of the Chicanx kids who did the program compared to the ones who didn't. They live in the same block, their families are similar, they got the same economic background, so it's almost like a natural experiment, right? Does the program work or does it not work? And by work I mean, right, does it have better outcomes for those students? Do they graduate more? Do they go to college more? That kind of stuff. And what they found was that the students who went through the MAS program, the La Raza Studies program, 70% approximately, like 68% I think, of them ended up going on to college, right? And the Chicanx kids who didn't go through the MAS program, only about 17% went on to college, right? So what was happening was you had this program that was making the curriculum relevant to the lived experiences of the young people in that district, and it was lighting a fire under them, not just about history, and not just about civics, and not just about literature, right? But also about science, and also about math. They started doing better in those subjects. They started taking their education more seriously than ever before. They were going to college at incredible rates. What did the state of Arizona do? They came in, and they squashed the program. They got rid of the program. They said, well, it's teaching these kids to hate white people. First of all, what? Wait, so telling Chicanx kids some stuff they already know about how we jacked half of their country in a war of aggression that the United States started on false pretense? You think the Chicanx kids don't already know what happened? Like brown families sort of know how half of Mexico became us, right? It's not a mystery to them. It's just the first time we actually ever told the truth about it was this program. And they were like, thank you, for telling the truth. It's not like they didn't know. So the idea that it's going to teach them to hate white people, you can't tell them the truth about what happened because then they'll hate white people. And then they said it's anti-American. You can't tell them the truth, then they'll hate America. So we'll just not tell them. They already know, but we're just not going to tell them again, right? Because we don't want them to be angry. Think of themselves as members of a group. That's what they said. We don't want to teach this kind of history because it'll encourage Mexican American youth to think of themselves as members of a group rather than just as individuals. Like normal history doesn't do that for white people, right? Do you think our normal history classes don't encourage white people to think about ourselves as members of a group, whether it's as white people, whether it's as Americans who happen to disproportionately, historically, in terms of power, be white? Well, you think we don't do that? Right? Think about the stories that we tell that we have no reason to tell, right? But they serve a very good purpose of propaganda, right? Like most Americans grew up thinking this story about George Washington, right? Just doing this story about George Washington, right? He was so honest, so honest that when he cut down a cherry tree, he was just so honest that he had to tell his dad, Dad, I did it. I did it. And I can't lie because I'm just that honest. I'm little George Washington. I'm going to be president of a country that I don't even know is going to exist yet, but I'm going to be president. It's just so honest. This is not a real story. He couldn't tell a lie, but the historians who made up the story apparently could, because it didn't happen. Never happened. The guy that wrote that story for the first time had already done 2 biographies of George Washington prior to the 3rd one, where that story appeared. He never told it in the first 2. Strange. You'd think it would have made it in there, but it wasn't, because he hadn't thought of it yet. But more Americans grow up thinking that story. Why would you tell that story? It's not true. Why would you tell that story? Because it's a way to make everybody proud of the first president. It serves the purpose of sort of creating this unity narrative that's rooted in falsehood. We'd rather do that than create a narrative rooted in truth, like with the MAS program. So the state comes in and says, you can't do that, can't have that, right? Luckily, there was a lawsuit, and the courts finally overruled the state and said that it had been unconstitutional to get rid of the program, but by now the program's gone. They're trying to reconstitute some version of it, but it's hard to do that. You had this great structure in place, and now it's been ripped out from under them. But what does that tell you? It tells you that there are ways to reduce inequity, right? There are ways to do it. The problem is you got to be prepared for the pushback, because there are some folks that are still operating on the old software, and they don't want equity, right? But it means that we could do it. There are ways to do it when you make the curriculum relevant to the lived experiences of young people. A couple years after that, there was a story out of Denver, Cherry Creek, which is sort of a more affluent, upper to middle class community part of Denver. And at the high school there was a math teacher, 9th grade, who was very frustrated because even though he knew that all the kids in his class were really smart, like a basic level, standard level math class, even though he knew they were all capable, he was upset because the black male students in the class in particular were not doing well. They weren't doing their homework. They were falling asleep in class, they were slacking back in the chairs, going to sleep, had music in their earbuds. But he knew they were bright. They just, for whatever reason, it wasn't working for them, right? And he wasn't going to give up on them, though, because he knew they were smart. He'd talk to them in the halls, he'd see them, He knew they were bright, he knew they were capable, but for whatever reason, they just weren't turned on to math. And so he decided one day he needed to up his game. He wasn't going to put it on them. He wasn't going to say, well, that's your problem. You either get it together or you fail. I don't care. Right? You're the one with the deficit. You're the one that needs to get your stuff together. It's not on me. No, he decided it was on him. He needed to try something different. So one day he goes up to the whiteboard or whatever, right? Takes his markers. He starts making all these graphs and charts and tables, and he doesn't label any of them though. So the kids have no way of knowing what these numbers mean yet. Just a bunch of different charts and graphs and tables. It takes him 15 minutes to fill up the board. And the students are getting nervous, right? They're like, what? What is that? Is that going to be on the test? What is that? That's horrible. We've never seen that stuff before. What is that? Right? He's not answering, though. He doesn't answer. And finally, after 15 minutes, he finishes. All the space is taken up. He turns around. He says, that is evidence that somebody's trying to kill you. And they're like, wait, what? What are you talking about? Somebody's trying to kill us. He goes, yeah. And he goes over and starts explaining what the data is, right? Because it's all data. He says, this right here, this is the difference in poverty rates in the greater Denver area between white, black, and Latino folks. This is the data on incarceration and stop and frisk and racial profiling. This is the data on low birth weight children and infant mortality. This is the data on unemployment numbers for teenagers between white, black, and brown. In other words, it was the algebra of inequality, right? He was showing them the profound levels of inequality in the greater Denver area. Now here's the thing. It's not like those guys didn't know, right? Those black guys in that class, they knew something was going on. They can look around and see the inequality. It's not like he was telling them something they didn't know, but because he was willing to put it out there and then looked at him and said, that's evidence somebody's trying to kill you. He said, you can either become one of these numbers or you can blow these numbers up. Whatever you want to do is cool, because I'm down for whatever. You want to blow them up, let's blow them up, right? And all of a sudden what he did was he explained the social significance of numbers. The social significance of data, the social significance of statistics, the social significance of math, right? It's not just something the state wants you to do as part of a requirement. It's not just something that you got to do to get a certification or a piece of paper that says you finished school. It's not just something you got to do so you can get a job. It's something you got to do so you can stay alive, right? And all of a sudden these young men who have been getting D's and F's, because that was what they'd been getting before, D's and F's, they had a fire lit under them. Right? Realizing the social importance of math, they decided not only were they going to start doing better in math and take it seriously, they started a mentoring program for 8th grade black students, right? They called it the Brotherhood, which scared the hell out of some people. People were like, was that a gang? It's a math gang. It's scary. It's a math gang. And all of a sudden these kids are getting A's and B's, right? Because now it's not just about individual success, or the school says you got to take this, or the state says you got to take this, or this is just a requirement. It's like, this is important. If I don't, and the pun is very much intended, if I don't master these numbers, this system is going to master me, right? Quite literally. And then what happens? Principal calls him in, says, school board's honest, you can't, they heard about this, you can't tell these kids that somebody's trying to kill them. It's like, why the hell not? It's true. And the principal says, well, maybe, but whatever, like regardless. It's like regardless, it's not about whether it's true or not, you just can't tell them that. You just can't tell. He's like, why? He's like, well, we have other ways to reach them. And the teacher's like, well, what are they? Because I've been at this job for more than a minute, and I haven't found them. This, on the other hand, worked, and it worked pretty quick. So it seems to me maybe you ought to stick with that, right? But he was, and he did, but they were on him constantly about it, right? Because they didn't, and again, why? If it's working, see, this is the thing, right? If the purpose of education were actually equality, we'd be copying that all over the country. We'd be doing the Mexican American Studies program or some other version of it. We'd be doing African American Studies, Asian American Studies, Indigenous Studies, working class studies, right? We'd be doing all of this stuff, ethnic and cultural studies, because it works for all marginalized groups, but people don't want to do it. They think it's fluff. Oh my God, what? You're just going to look at everything through the lens of black people? You're going to look at it all through the lens of Latino folks or Asian folks? Right? Well, standard American history is mostly through the lens of white folks. We just don't call it that. Right? It's like the reason we don't have, White History Month, right? Because we don't need it, because we got like a bunch of them. They just go by these tricky ass names like May and June and July and August. You don't have to call it White History Month. It's just, that's what it is. Right? If it's not February, I mean, I know we're in Hispanic Heritage Month, but halfway gone, how many of y'all didn't even know that, right? And if it's not one of those special months, you can bet we're going to be talking about white folks. And let's be honest, it's not like we don't talk about white folks in October either, or February. We still talk about white folks in those months too, right? But you don't have to specify any of that because you don't even notice your lens when you're the dominant group. That's the point, right? Right? You don't notice that, yeah, okay, maybe that's a Mexican American Studies lens, Mexican American Chicanx lens, but it's no different than the lens that the dominant group brings to its work. It's just that one is named and one is not. And the reason that one isn't is because it doesn't have to be, because it's just taken for granted as the normal lens. That's what privilege sounds like. It's what privilege looks like. You don't have to name that thing that is taken for granted, right? And so these programs work, and yet people get upset and try to shut them down, which says to me, they're not trying to shut them down because they aren't working for children. They are trying to shut them down because they are working for children, just the wrong children. And I'm not trying to sound conspiratorial. It is not a conspiracy theory that I'm weaving. It's not about, problem with conspiracy theories, there are a lot of problems with them, but the biggest problem with conspiracy theories is they're sort of fundamentally conservative, and I don't mean like conservative versus liberal, I just mean conservative in the fact they explain very little, right? Because conspiracy theories sort of rely on the idea that there's like one or two dudes behind a curtain, like the Wizard of Oz, right? And just like pulling the strings, I am the great and powerful Oz, and if we can just like throw open the curtain and expose the charlatans who are manipulating the system, then we can get rid of them and everything will be okay, right? And the fact is, it's so much worse than that, right? If it were just that, like that would be relatively easy, right? Because if you have 330 million people in a country and there's like a big conspiracy afoot, somebody's going to tell, right? You're not going to be able to keep 330 million people quiet. Like somebody's going to leak that. We're going to find out who the charlatans are. We're going to pull back the curtain. We're going to see them. We're going to get rid of them, and then everything's going to be fine. But it never works that way. Because it's not a handful of people. It's a system that's on autopilot, right? So it's not a conspiracy theory. It's what sociologists call functionalism, right? Sociological functionalism is the idea, fundamentally, is the idea that systems are the way they are because they work for the people who have the most power, right? So if a system is working for the people who are powerful, it stays in place. And if it's not working for the people who are powerful, it gets changed. That's why we keep standardized tests, right? Because they work for affluent people. They work for the people with the most power. It's not because they actually predict performance or what kind of person you're going to be or anything like that. Any educator worth their salt knows that it doesn't do that, right? But we keep them because it works really well for the people who have the most power in society, so why would they want to get rid of it? They wouldn't. So it's a system that's sort of on autopilot. But again, the Denver example, just like the Tucson example, tells us what? That we can make decisions about curriculum design and about the way that we teach, right? That can affect people and reduce some of those gaps and produce greater equity. It's about doing education with a social purpose in mind. And right now, for example, we got this big push for STEM. I know a lot of people are, take STEM classes, science, technology, engineering, and math. That's a big thing. Seems like our educational system is all sort of geared towards STEM right now. I want to say a couple of things about that, because I think there's some issues that we want to explore. It's not to say that STEM is not important. We got to have scientists if we're going to solve the ecological crisis that confronts us as a planet. We got to have engineers if we're going to have bridges that don't fall down, right? Sort of important. Tech and math, all important. I'm glad that some of y'all are into that. I just knew it wasn't going to be me, but I'm glad some of y'all are. That's not this guy, but I'm glad some of y'all are. So keep doing that, because we need you. And it's really important to have people who have been often excluded from STEM get access to it. So that's women of all colors, it's people of color, it's working class folks. Very important to open up access to STEM. But here's what concerns me. My concern is that we could have all of this push for STEM with the idea that these are the jobs of the future. This is how we're going to compete with people from other countries. They're running circles around us, and we have to be able to outcompete them in some competition. You know, like it's the Olympics of smartness or something. We have to be able to outperform and da-da-da-da-da. All that's nice, and all of that might be important to you. But here's the problem. We could get 20, 30 years down the road, do all this focus on STEM, have a lot of really highly educated tech bros and maybe some tech gals as well if we open up the ranks to women, right? We got all these tech bros and tech gals, but we don't have